The topic is the role of religion in public life. And of course, we're talking to the professor at Vanderbilt University, Dr. Baldwin. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, let me sort of pick up where we left off the last time. You were talking about the so-called mega churches, and you were making some distinctions between. Go on.
The mega church phenomenon, as I indicated, is a very recent phenomenon, and they're very interested in putting religion to public, to the service of public policy matters, and of course emphasizing the importance of religion in the public arena. I think we need to make some distinctions between the way Dr. King related religious convictions to public life and public policy matters, and the way mega churches are doing the same thing today. Dr. King, interestingly enough, respected the boundaries that separate church and state. And I think we don't see a lot of that today with many of the mega churches and many on the religious right. I think there's a tendency to transcend those boundaries, not to transcend those boundaries, or to, they're not so clearly marked. The divisions are not so clear when you look at the religious right and the mega church phenomenon. But Dr. King was very clear in the sense that he always respected our tradition of the separation of church and state. The other difference, I think, is that Dr. King brought a prophetic dimension to his public expressions of faith. That is, he critiqued our values, he critiqued our institutions, our practices, he critiqued the racism in society, the economic injustice, the exploitation of the poor, the violence. But we don't see that prophetic dimension today with the mega churches. Mega churches, as I indicated,
almost the opposite, really.
Exactly. In the comments we made before we went on the air, I indicated that mega churches are concerned about prosperity and praise. You know, God wants you to have this. Jesus came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. So you have a gospel of prosperity, positivism, but not a prophetic social gospel. And that's an important difference between what Dr. King and what we see today with people like Eddie Long and Creflo Dollar and T.D. Jakes and Paul Morton and others. Now, not to say, I'm not saying that we don't need these people, because I think they're doing a great job in terms of pursuing charity ministries, that is feeding hungry. They have programs for people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol and that kind of thing.
The homeless. And
exactly. But they don't challenge the very structures that make people poor in the first place. And this is where Dr. King was different, I think. He challenged the laws, the institutions, the structures that make people poor in the first place, that account for substandard housing, that account for the lack of affirmative action and equality, racial equality, economic equality. He attacked the structures, the institutions. And I think that's missing today with our mega churches, with our mega church pastors, with the electronic church. We don't see that today.
Well, now, Dr. Baldwin, what would you suggest that could sort of realign these various thoughts in reference to more social responsibility toward the gospel or toward for the church?
Yeah, I think we need to go back to what Dr. King once called a holistic gospel. Dr. King often said that the gospel deals with the whole person. It deals with the personal. It deals with the soul. Certainly we speak in terms of personal salvation, getting people saved, saving the soul, getting them converted, reborn. That's one dimension of it. But Dr. King also said that religion must deal with the social, the political, and the economic. That in other words, we should embrace a social gospel. The social gospel movement, as you well know, started by Walter Rauschenbusch, Washington Gladden, Josiah Strong, and other thinkers, had a heavy influence on Dr. King. So he always understood religion in both personal and social terms. That it deals with the personal, but it also deals with the social, which means that we should be about changing the world. We should be about feeding the hungry. We should also be about challenging those laws, structures, institutions that oppress people that account for inequality in human life.
Dr. Baldwin, you know, since you're associated with one of the great divinity schools at Vanderbilt University, et cetera, let's look at some of the things that are being done in various divinity schools, not only at your institution, but across the nation in terms of the kind of information that you receive and et cetera. Do you find that there's much effort on the part of those individuals who are responsible for these divinity schools in terms of talking about the king kind of social gospel or the other kind of gospel?
Unfortunately, we don't see enough of that. There is some of it, of course, in our more liberal seminaries, not in the more conservative seminaries where the emphasis, of course, is on issues like prosperity and praise and strict biblicism, fundamentalist Christianity. We don't see enough of that, and I think that's part of our problem. We need to revive what Dr. King was about. Go back to this idea of a social gospel that challenges structures, institutions, unjust structures, institutions, laws in society, and that are interested in creating a world that is what? In which poor people can realize their dreams, a world in which
people are fed,
where people are fed
housing,
and they have medical care, and there's no war and that kind of thing. I don't think we're pushing those kinds of issues enough, unfortunately, in the divinity schools and seminaries of this country. I mentioned to you earlier a 3-volume work that that is developing out of the Morehouse School of Religion now on the black church and public policy issues. And what we are looking at, of course, is the public policy activism of black churches. And we are talking about these same kinds of issues. What role should the church and religion play in addressing issues such as social welfare, such as health care, housing, women's rights, racism, issues of diversity? I think in reparations, we need to understand that that if we're going to be what Dr. King called the chief moral guardian of society, if the church is going to assume that role, we got to be concerned about these kinds of issues.
You know, soon we'll have an individual who will come to us to talk about this whole issue of AIDS again. Now, I think one of the real problems that we've often talked about on this show is the lack of any involvement of the church dealing with this as one of the crucial health items of
the AIDS crisis.
With the AIDS crisis.
Yes, yes.
What would you suggest over the last 2 minutes that we have here?
I think it's a golden opportunity for not just the black church, but for churches in general in this society to get involved. Interestingly enough, one of Africa, as you well know, will be the epicenter of Christianity in the 21st century. There's no question about it, because Christianity is growing rapidly there. And I think it's a good opportunity for our churches in this society to make connections with African churches and churches in Asia, which are growing rapidly, to address this crisis of HIV/AIDS. We're not doing enough in that regard. And I think part of it is because of the kind of interpretation, or the kinds of interpretations that churches have placed on this crisis. That is, you know, they see it, many of them see it as God's judgment on America or on the world. And I think we need to see it as a kind of health crisis that threatens our very existence as human beings. And churches should be able, particularly the mega churches, to put their resources, their personnel to the service of dealing with this kind of crisis.
Very good. And so Dr. Baldwin, over the last minute and a half that we have here, you believe that the churches can go back to a period where they are not only concerned with souls, but also have a social outlook and to have a very real social responsibility.
Yeah, I think it's all about recapturing the legacy of Dr. King and those who were involved in the civil rights movement. I think if we read Dr. King and study Dr. King, of course, Dr. King has much to say to us even today about the role of the church and religion in addressing public policy matters and how religion and the church figure into public life. I think it's a matter of going back and being, you know, studying Dr. King, studying the history of this country and how the debates have unfolded over time around this issue of the role of religion in the church in public life. I think there's much there that we can learn, and I think we can recapture that prophetic dimension that was so characteristic of Dr. King's ministry.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, over the last 15 seconds, let us thank you for bringing that excellent information by and giving us at least some guidelines as to how we might be able to become very, very more sensitive in terms of religion. And of course, we'll be back with our audience next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.